10 little-known details about Moses. First, Moses once asked God to remove his name from the book of the living. Why did Moses make such a bold request? What lessons can we learn from his actions? This event took place in the context of the golden calf idolatry. The story of the golden calf reveals deep truths about human nature and how people can stray from their commitments to the divine. It's ironic that while Moses was on Mount Sinai receiving the tablets of the 10 Commandments, the Israelites were violating the very first commandment, which states, "You shall have no other gods before me." Impatient with Moses' delay on the mountain, the Israelites decided to create their own god to worship. They melted their gold ornaments and forged a golden calf. This lack of patience led them to turn to Aaron for spiritual leadership in Moses' absence. Aaron complied and crafted a golden calf, directly breaking divine laws. Afterward, the people indulged in excess, worshipping the statue and engaging in uncontrolled feasting, drinking, and wild celebrations. The Lord informed Moses of this rebellion, saying, "Go down at once, for your people, whom you brought out of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have quickly turned aside from the path I commanded them. They have made a molten calf, worshipped it, and offered sacrifices to it, saying, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt.'" Exodus 32, 7-8. As Moses descended the mountain with the tablets, he met Joshua on the way and witnessed the people's pagan celebration. Overcome with righteous anger, Moses shattered the tablets of the law as a testament to their betrayal. Exodus 32, 31-34. Moses then approached the Lord and said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made gods of gold for themselves. But now please forgive their sin. If not, then blot me out of the book you have written." The Lord replied, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. Now go lead the people to the place I have spoken of, and my angel will go before you." Despite this pivotal moment, Moses did not minimize the people's grave sin or deny their responsibility for worshipping a golden idol. He acknowledged the enormity of their transgression, but still pleaded for mercy. This act was a profound appeal to God's compassion and kindness. Moses stood between God and the sinful people, offering himself as a sacrifice if necessary. He felt that Israel's sin was so severe that not even the blood of bulls or goats could atone for it. Only a man could intercede. Thus, Moses offered to be erased from the divine book if it could bring redemption to the people. Although God rejected Moses' self-sacrificial request, this act foreshadowed the sacrifice of someone far greater than Moses, one who would give his life for ultimate redemption. In this way, Jesus displayed the same selfless heart by dying for humanity's sins. God chose to forgive the nation, but reserved the right to judge individual sinners. "Lead the people to the place I have spoken of," God promised, reaffirming his faithfulness and presence with Israel. "My angel will go before you." Second fact, Moses and the idol of Nehushtan. In the sacred texts of Kings, there is mention of a serpent figure coiled around a pole, known as Nehushtan, originally described in the Book of Numbers. After their liberation from Egypt, the Israelites began to complain to God about the harsh living conditions in the desert. In response, God sent venomous snakes among them as punishment, leading to many deaths. When Moses prayed on their behalf, God instructed him to create a bronze serpent and place it on a pole, promising that anyone who looked at it after being bitten would be healed. Over time, the Israelites began to worship this bronze serpent that Moses had made. Between Moses' time and King Hezekiah's reign, the bronze serpent is mentioned in the context of Hezekiah's religious reforms, though it's likely that its worship began much earlier. In the second book of Kings, chapter 18, verse 4, it says, He removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, cut down the Asherah poles, and broke into pieces the bronze serpent Moses had made, for up to that time the Israelites had been burning incense to it. It was called Nehushtan, a mere piece of bronze. It's understandable that an object associated with miraculous healing became a symbol of veneration, but this clearly violated God's commandments. The bronze serpent was established by God as a means of salvation in the episode recorded in Numbers 21, but it was never intended for any purpose beyond that. Interestingly, the name Nehushtan translates literally to piece of bronze, which may suggest that Hezekiah used this name to remind the people it was just an object with no inherent power. In reality, it was God who provided the healing in Numbers 21, not the figure of Nehushtan. The key lesson from Nehushtan is that even good things or well-meaning people can become idols in our lives. All our worship, praise and gratitude should be directed solely to God, the only one worthy of such devotion, regardless of the extraordinary stories that surround us. Third surprising detail about Moses. Why did God almost take his life in Exodus? The burning bush was where God chose Moses to free the Israelites from slavery in Egypt and lead them to the Promised Land. Known as the lawgiver and mediator of ancient covenants, Moses had a pivotal encounter with God during this moment, in which he was entrusted with the salvation of his people. The Lord assured Moses that he would deliver the Israelites and guide them to Canaan, a land rich with resources. 40 years after his exile to Midian, Moses obeyed God's command to return to Egypt, accompanied by his wife Zipporah and their sons, Gershom and Eleazar. However, before he could fulfill his mission, Moses had to demonstrate his obedience. He had neglected to circumcise one of his sons, Gershom or Eleazar, possibly due to resistance from Zipporah. One night, during a stop on their journey, the Lord appeared and sought to take Moses' life because of this failure. In a desperate moment, Zipporah quickly intervened. She used a flint knife to circumcise her son and threw the foreskin at Moses' feet, saying, "You are a husband of blood to me." This act saved Moses' life. This incident highlights the significance of circumcision as a covenant and an essential commitment to God, underscoring Zipporah's statement, "A husband of blood because of the circumcision." God was on the verge of eliminating Moses because of his wrongful conduct. The specific transgression of Moses is not explicitly detailed in verses 24 to 26 of chapter 4 of Exodus, but the surrounding context suggests some important reasons. It seems Moses had neglected the rite of circumcision, an act symbolizing the covenant between the Almighty and his chosen people. This omission might have been influenced by his Midianite in-laws, especially Zipporah, who appeared to dislike this ritual. She likely persuaded Moses not to circumcise their son, believing that by doing so, she was protecting her husband's life. Moses had failed to obey a divine command. However, God was reminding him that he chooses to use those who are holy and righteous. We know that on our own we are neither holy nor righteous, and we are only made right through Christ. But that does not justify continuing to sin for the sake of grace. Moses was meant to represent God, yet he had not fulfilled the actions expected of a true divine representative, not even within his own family. For this reason, God attempted to take his life. The severity of God's judgment serves as a reminder not to take his will lightly. Since Moses was to lead the Israelites, he had to correct areas of his life that were not in alignment with God's holiness. This same rigor extended to the Israelites, showing that God would not use a corrupt people to judge others. Moses' inability to lead spiritually due to his unresolved sin had to be addressed. Once Zipporah performed the circumcision, God allowed Moses to continue his mission. Indeed, God considered taking Moses' life, even though he was tasked with teaching the Israelites divine laws while he himself was breaking them. Furthermore, Moses was not permitted to enter the Promised Land. Often, the severity of a punishment might seem disproportionate to the act committed. At first glance, the fact that Moses struck a rock out of frustration with the Israelites might not appear to justify being denied entry into the Promised Land. Moses had witnessed the 10 plagues, led the Israelites out of Egypt, crossed the Red Sea with them, delivered the 10 commandments from Mount Sinai, and guided them in numerous victorious battles. So why would a single incident at Meribah, where he struck a rock, cost him entry into the land God promised his people? The Israelites had complained to Moses about the lack of water and had challenged the Lord. So Moses pleaded with God, saying, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord then instructed Moses, "Go out in front of the people, take some of the elders of Israel with you, and take the staff with which you struck the Nile. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." Moses followed these instructions before the elders of Israel, and water flowed from the rock, providing life-giving water for the Israelites. Essentially, the Israelites brought their problem to Moses. He consulted God, and by following divine instructions, he provided water to the people. Now consider the second event at Meribah, described in Numbers 20, where Moses acted against divine instructions due to his frustration. The Israelites arrived at the desert of Zin near Kadesh in the 40th year after leaving Egypt. They settled in Kadesh, where Miriam died and was buried. Here, the lack of water led the congregation to rebel against Moses and Aaron, lamenting, "If only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring us into this wilderness to die here with our livestock? Why did you bring us out of Egypt to this barren place with no grain, figs, vines or pomegranates, and no water to drink?" In response to these complaints, Moses and Aaron sought refuge in prayer, bowing before the tabernacle of meeting. God's response was immediate, manifesting in radiant glory and instructing Moses, "Take the staff, and along with your brother Aaron gather the assembly. Speak to the rock in their presence, and it will yield water." Moses, carrying the staff as instructed, gathered the people before the rock. However, overwhelmed by anger and frustration, instead of speaking to the rock, he struck it twice with the staff. Water flowed abundantly, quenching the thirst of the congregation and their livestock. But this disobedient action had severe consequences. God questioned Moses and Aaron, saying, "Why did you not trust in me enough to uphold my holiness in the sight of the Israelites?" This lack of faith and obedience cost both Moses and Aaron the opportunity to lead the people into the Promised Land, as God had originally planned. These waters became known as the waters of Meribah, where the Israelites quarreled with the Lord, and his holiness was revealed among them. Moses, weary from the constant defiance of God's people, found himself in a difficult position. Could God simply ignore his actions? The people not only challenged God, but also constantly undermined Moses' authority. At first glance, it might seem that God was overly harsh with Moses, who had faithfully carried out his commands up until then. Couldn't an exception have been made in this case? The situation was indeed complex. It is essential to understand that the first striking of the rock symbolized Christ, as mentioned in 1 Corinthians 10:1-5. "I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud and that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. However, God was not pleased with many of them, and they were scattered in the wilderness. Moses followed God's instructions when he struck the rock in Exodus 17, but he disobeyed by doing so again in Numbers 20, where he was told to speak to the rock instead. This incident, the second striking of the rock, was a violation of divine directives. Thus, it is taught that Moses was punished for striking the rock twice instead of speaking to it as commanded in Numbers 20. According to 1 Corinthians, the rock in the wilderness symbolized Jesus Christ, the Son of God. In Exodus 17, God's command for Moses to strike the rock established a representation of Christ as our Redeemer. Christ is described as our rock and cornerstone, struck for our benefit, promising streams of living water, a recurring theme in the Psalms and Isaiah. Additionally, the book of Hebrews reminds us that Christ died once for all, with no need for additional atonement for sins. In Exodus 17, Moses was expected to strike the rock only once, symbolizing Christ's singular sacrifice for our salvation. Later, in Numbers 20, God's instruction to Moses was to speak to the rock, maintaining the symbolic image established in Exodus 17. By striking the rock a second time, Moses distorted that symbolic image, potentially leading to confusion about the sufficiency of Christ's one-time sacrifice for salvation. This error was corrected by God to preserve the truth that Christ, the rock, was sacrificed once for all. As a consequence, God decided to punish Moses to clarify the symbolism of the rock, preventing him from entering the Promised Land. Through this act, the Lord sought to establish a new representation to help people better understand salvation. Moses was denied access to the Promised Land to reveal that salvation, symbolized by the Promised Land, is not achieved through adherence to the law, represented by Moses, but only through the work of Jesus, symbolized by Joshua, whose name, Yeshua, also means Jesus. Instead of speaking to the rock as God had instructed to provide water for the people, Moses impulsively struck it in anger. This act of fury cost him his entry into the Promised Land. Additionally, Moses faced resistance from magicians such as Jannes and Jambres during his mission. This confrontation is narrated in Exodus 7 and 8, when Moses and Aaron challenged Pharaoh in Egypt, demanding the release of the Israelites from slavery. To validate their demand, Moses and Aaron performed miracles. Moses is especially remembered for the impressive number and variety of miracles he performed, as noted, all the mighty power and all the great terror that Moses performed. It is recognized that no other prophet possessed such power and authority to lead the people of Israel. Though there were great rulers, leaders, prophets, and priests in Israel before the coming of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, no one else combined all these roles as magnificently as Moses. Despite his miracles, Moses encountered resistance from Jannes and Jambres. In their first encounter with Pharaoh, God instructed Moses and Aaron to perform a sign by throwing Aaron's staff to the ground, knowing Pharaoh would demand proof. When they did, the staff turned into a serpent. Pharaoh, in turn, summoned his magicians, who also transformed their staffs into serpents. However, Aaron's serpent devoured theirs, a severe warning for Pharaoh. Exodus 7:8-13. The Lord had instructed Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh demands a sign, tell Aaron to throw down his staff, and it will turn into a serpent. Following God's instructions faithfully, Moses and Aaron presented themselves before Pharaoh and carried out the command. Aaron threw his staff in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it turned into a serpent. Pharaoh then called for his wise men and sorcerers, experts in dark arts and magic, who replicated the feat using their mystical techniques. Each one threw down his staff, transforming it into a serpent. However, Aaron's staff swallowed theirs. Despite this clear sign, Pharaoh's heart remained unyielding, ignoring what had occurred just as the Lord had predicted. Pharaoh's magicians were able to replicate the miracles of Moses and Aaron twice more. The first plague Moses brought upon Egypt was the plague of blood. The Egyptian magicians also managed to turn water into blood, mimicking Moses' act on the Nile River, Exodus 7:19-22. The Lord had instructed Moses, "Tell Aaron to take his staff and stretch out his hand over the waters of Egypt, its rivers, streams, ponds, and reservoirs, and they will turn to blood. Blood will be everywhere in Egypt, even in vessels of wood and stone." Following God's command, Moses and Aaron proceeded. Aaron raised the staff and struck the waters of the Nile in the presence of Pharaoh and his officials, and all the waters turned to blood. The fish in the river died, and the river stank so badly that the Egyptians could not drink from it, as blood spread throughout Egypt. However, the Egyptian magicians, through their spells, replicated this act, and Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, disregarding the warnings as the Lord had foretold. The actions of the magicians were deeply irrational. Instead of seeking to alleviate the divine calamity, they chose to worsen the situation by turning even more water into blood, thereby increasing the curse upon their own people. Such is the nature of dark arts. They did not aim to address the afflictions of the Egyptians, but rather to display power, neglecting the true needs of their people. This distorted way of thinking was not only counterproductive, but also left their people without relief in the face of adversity. The second calamity to afflict Egypt was the plague of frogs. Instead of attempting to resolve the crisis, Pharaoh's magicians chose to exacerbate it by summoning even more frogs. This act significantly worsened the situation. However, their ability to replicate the plagues ended with this event, as they were unable to reproduce the subsequent miracles. Acknowledging the magnitude of the events, the magicians admitted to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." Yet, despite their admission, Pharaoh's heart remained unmoved, ignoring their words, as the Lord had foretold. Pharaoh's magicians received power from Satan to mimic some of the divine miracles performed by Moses and Aaron. How were they able to do this? While Satan does not possess the same power as God, being one of the highest-ranking angels, he has the ability to deceive, imitate miracles, and predict future events with some accuracy. Nonetheless, God's supremacy became evident when the magicians failed to produce lice. The power of God far surpasses any evil force. The ability to perform miracles through dark powers and the tendency to accept them as genuine will be defining characteristics of the end times. Just as Janus and Jambres had limits to their powers, so does Satan. Even today, God remains sovereign. There is a living and victorious hope in Jesus. While miracles can indicate the presence of the supernatural, they are not enough to confirm the truth. Pharaoh's magicians, though learned and intelligent, lacked the wisdom that comes from God, as Paul pointed out. It is common to be amazed by spiritual manifestations without deeply examining their origin, which could be demonic rather than divine. Even if a new power emerges that seems to offer sought-after answers, we must remain cautious and not be deceived, as demonic forces can present themselves as angels of light. Regarding Moses, the Bible uniquely mentions him as being buried by God himself, withholding certain details about the circumstances of his death. Moses ascended to the heights of Mount Nebo, while the Israelites camped in the plains of Moab. From that summit, he was able to view the entire Promised Land, from Gilead to Dan, encompassing Naphtali, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Judah, to the Western Sea, the Mediterranean, as well as the Negev, the plain, and the Valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. This is described in Deuteronomy. Moses climbed from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. The Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the the Negev and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. Deuteronomy 34, 1-3. What an honorable title. Moses, known as the servant of the Lord, exemplified this role throughout his life, tirelessly dedicating himself to every task because he trusted God's guidance. He waited for God's instructions like a servant to his master and endeavored to follow the divine model revealed on the Holy Mount. Fully committed to God, Moses never neglected or underestimated his mission. His reverence for the name of the Lord was profound, his loyalty to the divine cause unwavering, and his faith in God's word unshakable. Yet even as a devout servant of God, Moses faced death, a fate inevitable for most humans, except for two who ascended to the heavenly realms without experiencing death. Moses was not one of them. At the end of his life, God allowed Moses to see the land he had left Egypt to reach. He climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the peak of Pisgah. There is a metaphorical Pisgah we all must face, and where we will join our ancestors. May we approach that ascent with the same resolve as Moses. The death of Moses was remarkably unique. The circumstances surrounding his passing were truly extraordinary. Mount Pisgah rises to an elevation of 4,500 feet, nearly a mile high. It is rare for men of 120 years to climb mountains of such magnitude and survive to tell the tale. Yet Moses did. He climbed it on foot. He required no broad path, and none was available to him. If you wonder how Moses could achieve such a feat at his age, here is the answer. At nearly 125 years old, Moses climbed a 4,500-foot peak with astonishing energy. On the summit, he was not consumed by self-pity. The image of this man of God, standing alone atop the mountain with Canaan spread out before him, was no coincidence. His death had been anticipated long before. Moses knew that his end was near, even though he would never set foot in Canaan. The illustrious leader had full knowledge of his destiny. It is important to note that while Moses' death reflects God's loving wisdom, the manner of his passing vividly demonstrates divine grace. From the moment he was told he would die, Moses neither complained nor prayed against his fate. His death was the epilogue of a fulfilled life. He understood that he had completed his mission, leading the people through the wilderness, a task he carried out faithfully. Additionally, his death occurred in the best company imaginable. Some men find their final moments most fitting when surrounded by loved ones. Moses, however, had no close family to close his eyes in death, unlike many who find comfort in their last moments with loved ones. Yet Moses died fulfilling God's will, leaving behind a legacy of strength and devotion. Imagine living 120 years without needing glasses, or 125 years without depending on crutches. Moses never found himself in a rocking chair, using liniments or relying on remedies. One remarkable detail in verse 6 highlights Moses' extraordinary life. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his grave to this day. God himself took care of Moses' burial, a unique occurrence in the Bible. Had you noticed this before? Another point to consider is that the location of his grave remains a mystery because the Lord chose to hide it. Why? This was to prevent the site from becoming a place of pilgrimage. Today, people might chart paths to Nebo, build shrines, sell souvenirs like popcorn and peanuts, or even construct a tramline to the site with signs reading, Moses' tomb. That is why God concealed it. This act was so significant to the Lord that it even led to an angelic confrontation. Jude 9 describes an event not mentioned elsewhere in Scripture, a dispute over Moses' body. Satan sought to claim Moses' body, likely to turn his burial site into a shrine. However, Michael the Archangel refrained from delivering a slanderous judgment and instead declared, "The Lord rebuke you." This episode reveals Michael's humility and absolute obedience to God's authority, even when confronting Satan. Despite his immense power, Michael submitted entirely to the Lord, exemplifying that submission does not diminish strength, intent, or courage. Michael's power is evident again in Revelation 12:7, where he leads the charge to cast Satan out of heaven. Finally, Moses appears with Jesus during the Transfiguration. This pivotal event, described in the Gospels, highlights Christ's divinity. Jesus selects Peter, James, and John, leading them up a high mountain after performing miracles and announcing his death. There, he is transfigured before them, with his face shining like the sun and his clothes becoming dazzlingly white. During this profound moment, two key figures of the Old Testament, Moses and Elijah, appear. Moses represents the law, while Elijah symbolizes the prophets, validating Jesus as the Messiah who fulfills the Scriptures. While Moses is venerated as one of Judaism's greatest leaders and mediator of God's law, Jesus surpasses him in greatness. Elijah, on the other hand, bridges the dynamic prophecy of Samuel's time with the later written prophets, emphasizing the continuity and fulfillment of God's redemptive plan through Jesus. Moses is revered as the prototype of a prophet, while Elijah is seen as the herald of the Messiah. According to Malachi 4:4-6, the giving of the law through Moses, God's servant, and the announcement by Elijah before the great day of the Lord are both emphasized. Their appearance alongside Jesus on the mountain highlights Jesus' supremacy, as he is acknowledged as the Son of God, surpassing both. The cloud representing the divine presence was revealed to Moses on Mount Sinai, and its radiance, the Shekinah, filled the tabernacle. This same cloud guided the Israelites through the desert, and the glory of the Lord filled Solomon's temple. Jesus embodies the fulfillment of both the law and the prophecies, demonstrating his superiority over Moses and Elijah, whose teachings point toward him as the incarnate Messiah, the prophet who completes Moses' prophecies. The disciples are urged to heed his words, to understand his messianic role. At the end of the Transfiguration, when the disciples look up, only Jesus remains before them. Their attention is solely on him, as Moses and Elijah would have desired, since their primary purpose was to prepare the way for the Messiah, the Son of God, and his redemptive mission. Despite this clear revelation of Jesus' identity, the disciples still struggle to fully grasp what they have witnessed. Number 10. Moses seeks divine guidance. During the Exodus to Canaan, Moses pleaded with God for his constant guidance. Exodus 33:12-17. Moses said to the Lord, "You have told me to lead this people, but you have not let me know who will go with us. You have said you know me by name, and that I have found favor in your eyes. If I have truly found favor with you, teach me your ways, so I may know you better, and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." The Lord replied, "I will go with you and give you rest." Moses insisted, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish us from all the other people on the earth?" Moses fervently desired God's presence, to which the Lord responded, "I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you and I know you by name." This dialogue reflects the profound and genuine relationship between Moses and God, almost like that of close friends. Although God had promised to send an angel to guide the Israelites, Moses wanted nothing less than God's own presence. Who was this angel really? Moses' curiosity and deep need for divine accompaniment drove him to ask for more than a heavenly messenger. Moses also requested to know God's ways, a request God fulfilled, as described in Exodus 34:5. The Lord came down in a cloud, stood there with him, and proclaimed his name. As he passed in front of Moses, he said, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation. Moses' first divine encounter was with the burning bush. He witnessed God's power over Pharaoh and the Egyptians, the parting of the sea, and water flowing from a rock. After spending 40 days and nights on Mount Sinai with God, experiencing his wonders and miracles, Moses yearned for an even deeper relationship with him. He sought a personal connection, something he valued more than all previous acts and blessings. Knowing God personally is the greatest blessing any human being can experience. According to John 17:3, this is eternal life, to know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. God graciously granted Moses' request to know who would go with him, assuring him, my presence will go with you. The word you in Hebrew here is singular, showing that God personally knew Moses, who had found favor in his eyes. Yet, Moses felt his relationship with God could grow even deeper. Despite witnessing miraculous events like the burning bush, the parting of the Red Sea, water flowing from the rock, and manna from heaven, Moses saw these as part of the past. He longed for a deeper and broader understanding of God. This is why Moses pleaded with God, "Show me your ways so that I may know you better." His desire was like that of a starving man at a feast. He wasn't satisfied with just tasting the appetizers or soup. He wanted to enjoy everything the Lord could offer. Moses understood the longing expressed in the psalm. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul longs for you, my God. Psalm 42:1-2. Every believer should share this same passion. God is not looking for mere churchgoers. He wants to be truly known by those who seek him with fervor and dedication. In essence, knowing God is the true meaning of eternal life. Moses set an admirable example of intercession and mediation before God. He was a man who deeply feared God and found his favor. However, a greater mediator than Moses was destined to come, Jesus Christ, in whom God was fully pleased. Through Christ, Christians enjoy the same privileges Moses did. Like him, we can know God, become his friends, and speak with him face to face. This is why Moses boldly asked, "Now, show me your glory." Exodus 33:18. His desire to know God was insatiable. He begged the Lord to let him see his glory. In other words, Moses longed for a visible revelation of the invisible God, a tangible and clear demonstration of his divine nature. Do you settle for just listening to sermons and singing songs, or do you have a constant longing to experience God's presence and glory more deeply in your life? Moses dared to ask a bold question, "Now show me your glory." It was God's mercy and compassion that led him to renew his covenant with Israel. God explained how he would show his goodness and glory to Moses while protecting his life. He used terms like hand, back, and face to describe his appearance. The King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who alone is immortal and dwells in unapproachable light, whom no one has seen or can see, to him be honor and eternal power. Amen. 1 Timothy 6:15-16. God's promise to reveal his goodness and glory to Moses was fulfilled, as described in Exodus 34:5-7. The Lord said, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion." But he warned, "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." Moses' request was graciously granted. He was promised a brief glimpse of divine glory. God would show his goodness while declaring his name, though Moses would not be able to look directly at God's face and live. The Lord prepared a special place for Moses. "There is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen." Exodus 33:21-23. While Moses stood on the rock, God's glory passed by him. God limited Moses' exposure to his glory for his protection, allowing him only a glimpse of his splendor from behind. Despite these limitations, Moses' face shone with the radiance of his encounter and the holiness of having spoken with the Lord. This partial revelation was significant because, while God is spirit and has no physical body, he used these terms to describe himself. No one has seen God in his full glory, but the Son of God has made him known. Jesus told his disciples, "Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father." John 14:9. Meanwhile, we continue to walk by faith with God.